That's how mean they are. We've talked about that before. Okay? All right. Here's another like trick question that you might see on your AP test. So I have earlier created an array called nums, right? So remember earlier, I'll call up its print again so we can see it again. So I'll say out.println arrays.toString nums. Remember, if you don't put arrays.toString there, you just see the memory address of the array. I want to see the contents. So I'm using that arrays class method called toString. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another int array. And I'm not going to name it nums. I'm going to name this one, we'll name it Brian. Okay, and let's just go ahead and declare it. And then let's give it some values by copying over the values of nums. And then just to see if this is working, let's print out this new array here, Brian. Okay, what I'm hoping to see is two arrays with the same exact values printed in them. All right, and sure enough, that's what I got. Okay, same exact values exist in the Brian array as existed in the nums array. All right, everything looks good. Okay, now here's where it gets weird. I'm going to take the Brian array and I'm going to change value, let's change value 2 to 888. Okay? And let me borrow this print statement here and I'm going to put it right there. So I'm going to print both arrays here after I've made that change to the Brian array. Okay, now let's bring up the code so we can see what's so interesting here. All right, look what happened when I printed the nums array. Now previously the nums array value at index 2 was 23. It's now 888. Here's the problem. I never told the nums array to change anything. I told the Brian array to change its value to 888. So why did the nums array also change to 888? Or I could go to nums 0 and change its value to 999. All right, let's see what happens when we execute this code now. Okay, so let me bring up the code segment and the output. Once again, both arrays changed their 0 index to 999. Why is this happening? Why are both arrays changing their value? Okay, here's the reason. There's only one array. In your computer's memory, there's only one array, and it has two names, right? You guys call your mom Mom, but she's got another name too. Maybe her friends call her Linda or whatever name she goes by. Okay, but she's the same person. She's got two names, all right? This array is the same array with two names. I can refer to it as nums, or I can refer to it as Brian, but it's the same exact array, okay? And to prove it to you, if we were to print, instead of printing the values in an arrays toString, if I just print the memory addresses of the two arrays, even though this is a random digit sequence, right? If a bunch of us ran this code, we'd get different results. I'm going to get the same result for both of those prints because it's the same exact array, okay? Even though that's a random digit sequence assigned to it, hexadecimal characters, I got the same one because there's only one array in my computer's memory, but I can refer to it through two different names. So you got to be a little careful when you copy an array over. That's why if you look in our book, there's that system.arrayCopy method, which is a little weird. But like I said, we're not going to cover that. But if we try to copy an array this way, we're actually not creating a second array. So that's something we got to be careful of. You could see that here in another example that I put. This has a new circle array called more circles But instead of creating a new array, I just copied over the address of the circles array. So when I make a change to circles 2 radius value and I set it to 100, it's going to actually, but if you notice, when I called the set radius method, I applied it to the more circles array. That change is going to show up in the circles array also. Even though I never called set radius on the circles array. I called set radius on the more circles array. But when I do that, I'm actually changing the circles array also. Because it's kind of misleading to say that. There's only one array, okay? It's just got two different names. So its radius was 99. Now it's 100. Even though I never called the set radius method on the circles array, it caused that change, okay? Same exact thing as what we saw in that int array a minute ago. All right, that's confusing, but that's a little flaw with copying object addresses over. All right, now here's the next thing, the last thing for us to look at, this idea of an enhanced for loop. Okay, what this is a new way of writing for loops for us. Instead of putting 3 arguments in with semicolons, with an initializing expression, a control expression, and a step expression, the for each loop, as this is called, only has this argument. Okay, that's a colon, that's not a semicolon. On the right side of the colon, you can put any type of array. You can also put a list and some other things we'll learn later in the year. Okay, but you can put any type of array. In this case, I put the nums array. Okay, now what does the nums array hold? Well, the nums array holds integers. So on the left side of the colon, I've declared an int value, and I just went ahead and reused the word index. Now what's weird is, look at this print statement. This is printing nums bracket index with brackets. This print statement is just printing index. We're going to get identical values. Now, I was thinking after I made this, that just to make this look a little better, I'm going to take the ln off, and I'm going to put a space in there, just so we see the numbers a little easier. Okay? You're going to see the exact same things print from these two loops. They're identical. Okay? Let's see if we can... There we go. Same exact values printed. It's just printing the nums array in both cases. This is called a for each loop. This loop starts at the first index of the array, index 0, and it takes the value out of the array and temporarily stores it in this variable, which I've named index. And then you can print that variable. Okay? Totally different up here. This loop generates an index 0, puts the index into the array with the brackets, and then accesses the value at that point. Now, what if I just printed right here index? Would these now be identical? No. No, the first loop now would not print the array values. It would just print the indexes. Okay? It wasn't actually accessing the array. The for each loop is accessing an array because that's what it's programmed to do. It's a different style of loop. Okay? So even though it doesn't use any brackets, it's accessing the array through the structure of the loop. Now, what if you come down here and you say nums bracket index? Well, it's not going to be a compile error because index is an int, but I bet we get a runtime error because we're going to go out of bounds. Because we're not actually putting indexes into the array, we're putting values. And I think the first value in is 999. There is no index 999. So we're going to go out of bounds when we try this. So we got to be careful. This is a different structure of loop. So it's actually a little misleading to call that variable index. Maybe I'll call it like value because that's a little more appropriate. It's actually representing the value of the array. Now, it always starts at 0 and it always goes to the end. So if you wanted your loop to start at index 1 or 2, you're out of luck with the for each loop. Okay? You'd have to go back to like your traditional for loop. So it doesn't have as much freedom of structure as like a traditional for loop, but it is very useful. Now, what if I wanted to use this loop with my circles array? What would that look like? Okay, so let me show you how I could use this with like the circles array. Well, if I was going to write a for each loop for the circles array, on the right side of the colon, I'll put the name of the array, so circles. And then on the left side of the colon, I have to say what type of objects are in that array. They're not ints, they're not strings, they're circle objects. So I would declare a circle variable reference. I can name that whatever I want. Maybe I'll just call it C for short. Okay? Now what I could do then is I could apply any circle method I want to C. So for example, I could say C.set radius, and maybe I'll set every radius to 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I could print the radius. I could say out.println c.getRadius, because again, C is a circle, so I can apply any circle method I want to object C. Now, I would have a little problem here. Maybe you see it. I would get one of those null pointer exceptions eventually, because eventually it's going to try to access that one circle that's still null. I don't remember if it's circle 8 or 9, but I got that null pointer exception. So this is what I was talking about earlier. This is why we're going to write code like this. We're going to make sure that C is not equal to null before we try to do any circle methods on C. Okay? We're going to make sure that it's not a null pointer. Anytime we have an array of objects, we have to be cautious of any of those objects being null. Okay? So this code right here would prevent that from happening. Now I shouldn't go out of bounds. I'm sorry, not out of bounds. Now I shouldn't get the null pointer exception. If you count, there's only 9 values there. The reason there's not 10, even though that array was built to hold 10 circles, is because one of them was null and we skipped it because of the if statement. So only 9 of those values printed. Okay? That's a null pointer. We always got to be careful of that when we're dealing with an array of objects. All right? Some tricky stuff, some real tricky stuff here.